Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Roundtable Co-op's Indie Insights. Music is such a big part of every game, and I don't think we could imagine games without their scores. It's impossible to think about, say, a Legend of Zelda without thinking about the magical opening of that game. Like it's not even the main theme, but Ocarina of Time when it opens up on Hyrule Field there, it's just amazing. The music just does this good job. Good job is not quite the right word, but great job of bringing us into the game and setting the atmosphere and the tone for what we want to see. And I'm very happy to be joined by Jessica Wells, who is a composer and is doing the arrangement for a very special outing for Orchestra Victoria called Indie Symphony, where they're taking some music from indie games and translating them for the orchestral sound. It's going to be a 60-piece orchestra playing with that, which is just absolutely amazing. But before we get into that, welcome, Jessica. Thank you for making time to come and have a chat with me today.
Thanks, Darren. It's really nice to be here and to chat about this incredible topic.
It really is such an incredible thing. Like I said it in the intro, music has this ability to transport you and just make you feel things. And I must admit, in the research I was doing for this, I was looking at your website, and there was one piece there, Emu in the Sky, I think it was, that I was listening to, and just like that little bit where it kind of feels almost like a waking up moment. And I didn't read too much into why the piece was, or the story of the piece, but talking like it just felt like it was a bit of waking up, a bit of trepidation, and then like almost like this big huge, oh, the day's here, let's get going, and that sort of thing. So before we get into that, I do want to talk about you and your history in the musical industry. So can you give us a bit of a background on yourself?
Sure. It's quite varied, but
You
you'll hear
looking at
I have a
your history on your website, there is a very wide and varied body of work that you have there, which is just absolutely amazing.
thank you. Yeah, I guess that's all I ever wanted to do was music, and yeah, I have a funny accent because I grew up in New York,
Mhm.
and then came to Sydney when I was 10 years old in the mid 80s, and so in terms of film and gaming, I mean, the sounds of the 80s were kind of where, I was listening to Tron by Wendy Carlos, and I'd request my mum to get that video out every week from the video library down the street. And my local friends had Pac-Man, and, we'd go to the gaming places to put our quarters in and play Donkey Kong and Q*bert. And so, these things were sort of part of my childhood, and really made me want to do electronic music as well as written notated music. So I, sort of got into arranging things for my school, and, went into the Conservatorium of Music here in Sydney to learn, the craft, I suppose, of writing notated music. But I also did electronic music as well. So I had a pretty good grounding in both areas. And now I work a lot in film and TV as an orchestrator and arranger, as well as a composer. I do have written themes, for example, Q&A on ABC television, and the latest theme for Compass on ABC television, and, various films. I've got a couple of short films which are sort of hitting the festival circuit this year. Today I'm writing music for an award ceremony. You kind of just take whatever you get into your workload. And I work for some really amazing Australian composers. For example, I orchestrated on the movie Elvis
Oh,
over
nice.
the last couple of years, and worked on a lot of international projects that also get recorded in Sydney. For example, the Lego Movie and Lego Batman, and lots of Happy Feet and many, many animated films or projects that get recorded in Australia. And so I can work in all kinds of areas, and I love arranging for orchestra. And that's ever since I was a little kid doing ballet class. I think that's really what got me into the sound of the orchestra. And things like Tron by Wendy Carlos included orchestra, electronics, and pipe organ and choir, like the whole gamut was in there. And things like the Ghostbusters soundtrack, which was huge when I was a kid. I had the cassette tape in my Walkman. We had Elmer Bernstein's score, which had a beautiful solo cello, which was the instrument played by Sigourney Weaver in the film, plus a theremin, an onde martineau, which is a French kind of theremin-like instrument with orchestra. So I always kind of was interested in this hybrid of using synthesizers and live instruments together.
It very much is an interesting thing because you do kind of get those I guess the classical music, if that's a term that can be used, where it's your orchestral stuff. It's your strings and your brass sections and things like that, and maybe a piano thrown in or a harpsichord or something like that. But when you start getting in things like more conventional instruments, like having an orchestral thing with a rock drum set in there
Mm.
or an electric guitar and stuff like that, and like you mentioned, the theremins and just sort of different instruments, that's a really cool thing to see, that blending of tones and of sounds that those things make.
That's what makes it
Mm.
interesting, I think, for me. Yes, there's the full gamut of classical music that we've got, from over history. Also, I was very interested in medieval music. I played the recorder, so I used to play in a lot of early music ensembles as well. And you kind of all the different sound worlds that can be used. And I think because games need these different worlds, you need to create different worlds. How do you create that world in sound? Not just visually. So the composers have to be very creative about how they do that. And you talked about 8-bit. I mean, we had to start with that, right? And then now the soundtracks are so beautifully produced to the highest level. But you have a whole gamut of styles and instruments that you can use to create these new worlds. And it's very exciting to see when something new comes out. What direction have they gone in?
Mm. You mentioned a couple of times like the 8 bit and the early sort of video game music there. It's very interesting to me, and I'm going to be using that word a lot because just the whole topic is so interesting. My family's got we're not classically trained people, but we've been families that have been in pub rock bands and things like that. And I've always loved my music, but stuff where you're translating music into those early video games. I've just finished playing through a game called The Making of Karateka, and Karateka was an Apple II game that got ported to the Commodore 64 and Atari at some point. But the guy that made it, his dad was a composer, and there's a bit on this that talks about how his dad composed the music on real instruments in the 80s, and then had to go, okay, well, I've only got like 2 music tracks. How do I make this work to go into there? And just the technical limitations then of moving the composed music into the game. And I just found that so interesting. You did mention something earlier that you're an arranger and a composer. So for those that probably aren't so into the music side of things, what's the difference between a composer and an arranger?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess composers will come up with the ideas, the melodies, the counter melodies, the harmonies, all of those things from scratch. And the composer is the copyright owner, of that. And the arranger will take something that exists that's already written by a composer and then make it work for a different ensemble or a different version of that, or reduce or expand something for different ensemble sizes. And we have a very high set of skills that are required to do these things. So we know just as much as the composers, and often arrangers are composers too, because we understand, the whole concept of how to write. But we're actually working from someone else's music, and then, I arrange my own things too. I've got that Emu in the Sky piece, which was performed by the Australian Youth Orchestra, had a particular set of instruments for it. And my high school orchestra is about to play it. And they said, can you please add a piano and a bass clarinet? Because we have players in the orchestra for those instruments. So I have arranged my own piece by adding those extra instruments in.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so we often do arranging of our own. But yeah, I can get asked to arrange all kinds of, different music from different genres for whatever the ensemble that happens to be that needs it.
That's really cool, and that's rather appropriate when you're talking about the Indie Symphony that Orchestra Victoria are doing, and it's just such a marvelous thing seeing these different musical pieces from games be adapted to the orchestra sound. And I feel it's probably a little bit easier these days than it was, say, in the early 90s, because the music in games is so much closer to what musicians would play. And but there is still the stuff like Reach for the Summit, which is like the final level piece in Celeste that gets played there. But that's all still very sort of retro 8-bitty sound. So while there's obviously some bits that will translate to strings and some to other instruments, how do you kind of go about the more obscure things and arranging them for an orchestral arrangement?
That's a really good question, because yes, we are dealing with a piece of music that's written for a specific ensemble or sound world. And for Lena Raine's piece Celeste, it's all synths. Obviously, she's programmed all of this stuff in there. And then I have real live instruments that have to play this together,
Yeah.
on stage, 60 of them, and with a conductor that's keeping them together. And so what you have to do is kind of break down the music into its components. And this comes from training and, understanding the concepts of music. I mentioned melodies, what's the main thing that you're hearing? Da, 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 da. That's the melody of Celeste. So that melody, I can put it onto different instruments. So in one part of the piece, I start with piano. So I decided to start with piano because Lena also told me that there were some amazing piano versions
Oh, wow.
of her music, and one for piano four hands, that were out there. So there's a lot of people just all over the world arranging things digitally and putting them out there, and sheet music, et cetera, because I mean, honestly, it's almost like we're still in the time of Mozart and Beethoven and Clara Schumann and all these composers from way back. The only way that you could replay their music was from sheet music.
Yeah.
And there's still people learning instruments and playing piano in their house that want to play these melodies. So it's the sheet music sells really well from games because everyone wants to play them. So I decided to start with piano, playing this melody. And then throughout the whole orchestration of this work, which is about 9 minutes long, games music is quite repetitive. Obviously, it goes around and around because it's looping. I mean, I can't loop. Obviously, I have to finish at 9 minutes. Yeah. So then I'll pass that melody through to the strings, the violins, and I have an oboe playing it in one section. So I just play with the colors, and it's like being a painter with sound. That's the fun part of being an orchestrator, working with all the different instruments you can put things on. I have kept a synthesizer on a keyboard in it as well. And Lena's providing the actual sound that was used in the game so that we can have that one element that people will recognize that sound on the melody as well. So yeah, that was nice to incorporate a synth into the orchestra as an extra component.
That is so cool. I love the idea of this melody weaving through the different instruments of the orchestra and just having their own little spin on how it all plays out. It's really, really cool. And look, I do keep getting back to how you arrange it, because obviously you're not going to have access to the orchestra straight up to be able to sit there to
Sure.
work out which part does which. Do you have these instruments, or do you have digital versions of the instruments so you can arrange them and get a feel for how it's going to play out once you get on the stage?
Yeah, I mean, these days, but when we started, we didn't have great sounding, sounds out of our keyboards and things like that. But yeah, I use Sibelius software. Also, started in Finale, then moved to Sibelius. Now I'm learning Dorico. There's like 3 different notation softwares. A lot of people use MuseScore. There's so many notation softwares out there. And when you select an instrument, it will sound like that instrument when you play it in. And so once you vertically put all your layers in for the orchestra, you can actually hear a pretty good, rendition of basically what it will sound like. Of course, there's a lot of subtleties that aren't going to come out in your MIDI version of things, but that's where in your training and experience how it will actually sound when the orchestra plays it. And I can kind of hear that in my head as I'm listening to MIDI. And, I've been doing this for like 25 years. So I started with some really horrible general MIDI sounds
Oh my
back
God,
in the
can only
day.
imagine like early 90s MIDI stuff and
Oh
just,
yeah,
oh,
it was pretty awful.
yeah.
So you really needed to use your
Yeah.
imagination as to how the instruments would really sound. And so it's sort of crucial if you work in the job to be going to rehearsals and talking to musicians and hearing the music played live so that you not know. I think as an orchestrator, that word, it means, to me, it means that you're trying to put in dots, the notation dots, a translation of what you want to be heard live, and understanding how to do that sort of efficiently, with how you notate things, and so that the players will instantly play it how you want to hear it is the whole point of learning orchestration and notation skills. And it's really important to have um, good understanding of how someone is going to approach playing what you've put in front of them so that it comes out the way you want it to in rehearsal, and you're not spending heaps of time going, oh no, actually I want that note short, or I want that note long, or can that be softer or louder. There's so many variables. So yeah, I've gotten very quick at doing this, and then because I can do that quickly, I can then focus on the fun bits, which is, oh, I'm going to put an oboe with a glockenspiel
Yeah.
and a tremolo violin in this part, and play with that. And then I'm going to go huge at the end, with everyone playing, for a big finale,
Yeah.
and just sort of building the structure of the work so that it's exciting for the audience.
Mm. That is super exciting, and I can't wait to see it. So for those that are listening, this event, the Indie Symphony presented by Orchestra Victoria, is happening on Friday, the 8th of September at Hammer Hall in Melbourne there. So if you're in Melbourne or even just greater Victoria, I would just get your tickets and go and see it because it's going to be such an amazing show. And I wish I was over there, but I'm over on the other side of the country in Western Australia. So unfortunately can't make this one. But there is a whole heap of really amazing indie games that you've gotten in here. We've mentioned Celeste. There's Everybody's Gone to Rapture, Journey, which was just such a wonderful experience as a game, and Transistor, Hades, Stray Gods, which was only just released, as well as Necro Barista and Hollow Knight. So some really great games that are there. But I'm particularly interested in Stray Gods because that only came out on the 10th of August. Did you
Yeah,
get?
that wasn't me. So that was another arranger that did that particular one. But I did Hollow Knight,
Mm,
and I actually did it a couple of years ago because they were going to put this concert on, and of course COVID struck and we weren't able to do it. So it's been a while since I've arranged that one. I'm
yeah.
really excited to see how that one comes about. And we actually do have a soprano singer who's going to
Oh,
sing,
nice.
as part of that, and also as part of the other pieces in the. And I also just did Necro Barista, so that
Mm,
that was mine as well. And that has some really cool synth sounds in it too that we're trying to replicate, and put into
mm,
the orchestra as well. But that took a little bit more creative orchestrating to try to get across because of the nature of the music. It was a little more tricky to notate this.
mm.
So yeah, it's a little more fluid and not like your drums and bass kind of thing. So that one was a little bit more tricky. But I think looking at the choice of music for the concert, I think the audience are really going to get a big treat
Mm.
because no one's going to have heard this before, the way that they're presenting this.
Yeah, and the games that you've picked as well are just, they have some pretty iconic music in it. And sadly myself, there's only two games on there that I've played, and one of them I didn't really play a lot, and that's Celeste, which I loved to death. I love that game. And I played a bit of Hades, but the roguelike genre isn't really my thing. But the way Hades was presented in the story and the music just made me keep coming back to it for a while there. And being able to see these brought to life would be amazing. Just on the piece of the music that was selected, what was the process of choosing which game's music was selected for the orchestral pieces?
Well, I'll have to put that back onto Orchestra Victoria and
Ah,
Elise, who is, just absolutely amazing as a producer, trying to pull together all the different elements and had to be, of course, this has to be cleared by the composers because
mm,
they need to say yes, I'm okay with this, and then sort of come back and forwards with me to see, how it works and be okay with me doing this, and so there was a huge amount of organization that had to go into organizing this and making them together. But I think Elise has picked some incredible pieces, and they've really tapped into the game scene. I think that's great because a lot of orchestras are not going to be in that world. So this is sort of groundbreaking, and for the audiences, they'll also have a screen, with some of the imagery from the games running on the screen, which really ties it all in, I think. As a spectacle, you get to watch the orchestra playing, which is very cool. It's a spectacle in itself, and then sort of tie that in with the game. So the choices were, I think, to try and give a nice flow through the concert and some contrast, because you need a little bit of contrast of different styles. Necrobarista, for example, is a bit of a chill kind of vibe, before sort of launching into something bigger. And I think just things that would appeal to a wide audience as well. Yeah, and I tried to go play Hollow Knight myself, and I was doing okay until I hit the first big boss, and then I kind of was like, I can't get past the Hornet.
Yeah.
And, I'm more of a Nintendo player, so it was a little bit hard for me, but I just love the music, and I love being in that music, and I think it's this repetition. Everyone just gets to know the music absolutely in such detail because they're in the game and repeating it over and over. Well, I was repeating it over and over because I couldn't get past the boss. But you get into that world, you get to know the music so well. So anyone that knows these particular pieces is going to really enjoy, I think, the new way it's being presented.
100%. I do want to know though, is there a particular piece from a video game that you would love to see in this or in a future Indie Symphony that could, for whatever reason, couldn't be achieved in this lineup?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I grew up playing all the Nintendo games, from way back, and some of them are so quirky. I just think that the quirky ones are always really fun to score. I don't know. I just my daughter is playing Zelda right now, so I'm just kind of, and she bought an ocarina because
because why not?
This is what happens. Like, this is what happens. This is how kids are, are wanting to play instruments and things. My daughter plays an instrument already, but wanted to buy the ocarina so she could play the tune. So she's playing it. And this is fantastic stuff, so I'm pretty sure there's going to be the newest games will probably get picked up and played. There's some wonderful orchestras around the world that do this quite often. You can find them online, doing these kinds of shows. But for Australia to have Australian games, Australian composers in there, it's brilliant. I'd love to see more of that. More
Absolutely.
Of Australian.
Absolutely love that. And of course, Necrobarista, I think, was funded by Screen Victoria and came out there. And Hollow Knight is made by some Adelaide devs. So that's just amazing to see the night being finished off with those two pieces there. And I do love that symphony orchestras have kind of pivoted a bit to pop culture and stuff. Like WA Symphony Orchestra here, I've seen them a number of times. Mainly doing the adaptations of movie scores. And also there's a musical artist that I loved in the 90s, Ben Folds. He had the song Brick. But I'd absolutely love, great pianist, and he would come and play with the WA Symphony Orchestra when he came here. And just funny bits and pieces where you just get that nice flow through it. And I guess it probably kind of started with Metallica, I think, in the 90s, because they did Symphony in Metallica, and I think Kiss did something as well. And it's just it's a great pivot for symphony orchestras to be getting into stuff like Indie Symphony, to make sure that they're getting this music to a whole new generation.
Absolutely. It's got to sort of crack open the dryness or, fustiness of what an orchestra might mean to younger people, and get them in and see how exciting it actually can be when you're in a concert and hearing all these vibrations around you, in that space. I think that's what it's so powerful when you have the orchestra playing in the same space as you. And so I encourage people to get to a concert, and if they might be going to see Harry Potter live, but then go and see some other concerts and keep continuing to enjoy it. I do a lot of this kind of thing. So I just finished Man from Snowy River, which was done in Melbourne, and I've done lots of David Bowie live, or with orchestra, or Kate Miller Hyde Key, and Missy Higgins. I've
Yeah.
written arrangements for all their things with orchestra live, and yeah, it's just a fantastic way of showing um, the versatility of the orchestra. It's
Mhm.
not just Mozart or Beethoven.
Yeah.
We can do so many more things with our players, and they're all incredible players. In the orchestras, they can play anything,
Well,
so
and
it's
I
so
feel
much
as well
fun.
like orchestra music kind of gets this feeling of here's a bit of music, you play it, and that's it. But one of the things I took away from Ben Folds in particular, so there was a thing that happened with him at one of his concerts years and years ago. Like there was a bit of a lull in the concert, and someone shouted out, "Rock this bitch," and he's proceeded to make a song up on the spot about that. So
I heard
every
about
time
that one. Yeah.
it happens, like I was at a show here in Perth at the concert hall, and there's been a lull, and someone's shouted that out again, and then he's proceeded to make up a song and telling the orchestra, okay, now the strings play this chord on this, and do this, and just got the whole orchestra involved. And one, for him to be able to do that, that's amazing, and two, for the orchestra to be able to just adapt and go with the flow. It's incredible. Absolutely love it. And no doubt as well, everybody that goes along to see Indie Insights on the 8th of September at Hammer Hall in Melbourne, they are going to get such a wonderful show and just enjoy this. I think it's the 2 hour, 20-minute show.
It's
Um,
pretty substantial. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is going to be, it's just going to be absolutely amazing, and you'll get lost in this music. And I know you said that there's the visuals there, but I always remember, I've seen a big Star Wars fan. You can probably see a couple of Star Wars
Yeah.
Lego busts
Absolutely.
behind me there, just a few. But like I always remember, there was a point in watching the Star Wars movies being played by Wayso where I've gone, I know this movie inside and out, so I stopped watching the visuals and watched the orchestra. And I tell you what,
Ah,
that was a
wonderful.
different experience altogether. So I hope that people do that as well. I'm sure that there's plenty of great visual stuff going on, but watch the orchestra as well, because you'll come away with some extra things there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to go and look it up. If you go, what's that thing over there being played? Go and research it, and see what's going on out there. It's so fascinating, and so many different sounds are going to come out of those same group of musicians, and that's
Mhm.
why I love my job.
Yeah, it's so good. So many different and varied things. Like you say, with the work that you've done between orchestra music, chamber music, film and TV. It's amazing, and cannot wait to see this. So please go and get your tickets for Orchestra Victoria presents Indie Symphony. And Jessica, thank you so much for
But
joining me today.
it's been lovely. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It's a
Cheers.
really good interview.
Cheers.
Thanks.